Thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Dan Tranter. I work at the Minnesota Department of Health in the Indoor Air Unit. I went to the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, got my degree there. I've been working at MDH for the last 23 years, and I deal with indoor air quality, so indoor air pollutants that can be found in homes and other buildings. And I wanted to share with you some information about indoor air quality today. We travel around the state and do these talks to community organizations, including Rotaries. If you know of other groups that are interested in learning about indoor air pollution, feel free to put them in touch with me. We at the health department deal with a wide variety of health issues, of course, and in the environmental health field, we deal with a number of environmental hazards that can be found in and around homes. I'm going to focus on radon, mold, and carbon monoxide today in the interest of time. But there are other issues that can be found in the home, and I could answer any questions you may have about these other hazards that may be present in your home or other buildings. So things like chemicals coming from paints and products, what we call volatile organic compounds, or asbestos, which can cause lung disease. That can be found in insulation, flooring, asthmagens like allergens, dust mites, pet dander, as well as chemical irritants that can trigger asthma attacks. These can be found indoors too. Lead paints, lead in water can be health hazards for people, especially young children, affecting their brain and nervous system development. We have a lot of resources at the state that go into drinking water. If you're on city water, if you say you live in Bloomington, your city does test its own water, and you can check the annual drinking water report to see what's in your water. If you're on a well, like maybe you have a second home, a cabin, maybe you live in a rural area, you're responsible for testing your own water in those cases, and we have information to help people check their own well. We also deal with slips, trips, and falls, injury prevention. We provide guidance around ventilation and filtration to help improve the quality of the air inside building. And lastly, we deal to some degree with pest management, because things like mice and cockroaches can trigger allergy and asthma symptoms, and the chemicals we use to deal with some of these pests can also be a health hazard. So when we think about healthy homes, these are most of the topics we cover at MDH. But today I want to focus on radon, mold, and carbon monoxide. So you may have some familiarity with radon. It is this kind of mysterious gas that a lot of people don't know much about. It is a type of radiation. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. It comes from the soil. So we naturally have a lot of uranium in our soil in Minnesota, more than most of the country. And that uranium breaks down and eventually becomes a gas called radon. That radon floats to the surface of the soil, it goes into the outdoor air, and it can get sucked up into the indoor air. So our indoor air can have very high levels of radon in Minnesota. When you breathe that radiation, it can damage your lung tissue, and that can lead to lung cancer. Unfortunately, lung cancer is a very deadly disease. The leading cause of cancer death in the United States is lung cancer still. While most can be attributed to smoking, there's thousands of cases of lung cancer that we attribute to other factors, air pollution, including radon. So of the 130,000 lung cancer deaths per year, approximately, the US EPA estimates about 21,000 lung cancer deaths in the United States per year are caused by radon exposure. In Minnesota specifically, the EPA has estimated about 600 deaths. That number may seem small to you, but relative to our population, it's higher than most of the country on a per capita basis. We have more radon in Minnesota than most of the country. So nationally, the indoor average is about 1.3, and we can measure radon in units called picocuries, named after the great scientist Marie Curie. So picocuries per liter of air. A liter is about a quart, just a little bit bigger than a quart. In Minnesota, the indoor average is about 4.2. Unless you've tested your house and you fixed your house, you have about a 50-50 chance that you're going to be around 4 or higher. And that is the action level. At 4.0 or higher, we recommend people fix their houses. You can never completely eliminate your radon exposure. There's a little bit in the outdoor air. So our goal is to get it as low as reasonably achievable. And the first step is to test. You can get a test kit, and I brought some test kits. I just brought this demo test kit. So this is a commonly used, single-use DIY test kit. You can get it online at mn.radon.com. Many of our hardware stores have test kits that are similar, not exactly like this one, but similar. You can get these test kits from local health departments, so you can check there. You could also hire a licensed pro to do the testing for you. So here are different types of test kits. On the top you see short kits you do for a few days, and then you see on the top right a digital device that a professional would use. You can also do a long test for like 90 days or even up to a year if you wanted to. So there's a lot of ways to do testing, but it's fairly straightforward. You just need to follow the instructions. And again, if you get a reading at or above 4, we highly recommend fixing the radon problem, reducing it. So we can hire licensed radon mitigation professionals to install a radon system. And it has a pipe that starts under the house. So that pipe allows soil gases to move up and through the pipe and out and reduce the amount of radon that's coming in. And there's a fan in line. Here's what the fan looks like, okay? I'll show it for the folks on Zoom. So this fan runs continuously. You know, I can spin the blades and you can see this runs all the time. It's up in your attic or outside. And so these fans can reduce radon by giving the soil gases a discharge point, and that stops the radon from coming in. There's notification alarms, a visual pressure gauge. There's an alarm that tells you if the system stops working. And by the way, there's a lot of labeling, and we can do inspections. If you have had a system installed or will install one, feel free to contact us. We'll do a free inspection of the system. So in summary, radon is a common environmental hazard in Minnesota and beyond. It is the second leading cause of lung cancer, so I want to encourage you to test your homes. There are DIY tests you can get online. You can get test kits at hardware stores, through your health departments. You can hire a professional. The action level is 4. So if you're over 4, we highly recommend you fix the problem by hiring a licensed pro to install a radon system. And there are brochures on your tables. You can learn more about radon through the brochures. And also on our website, we have a lot more information. So I think I'll hold questions till the end, and I'll be happy to answer questions as time allows. But the second hazard I wanted to talk about today is another indoor air pollutant. It's mold. Here's a pretty dramatic picture of a flooded home that stayed wet for a long time. You can see the mold growing on the ceiling. Hopefully you'll never run into this, but at least in this case, you can see where the mold is. In many cases, it's hidden behind a wall. Here it's very obvious. It's going to be an expensive repair unless you decide to demo the house. So for molds to grow, you need 4 things. Number 1, you need spores. These are like tiny microscopic seeds. They're floating around in the air. There's probably some spores in the indoor air in this room. They're everywhere. They come in through open doors, windows, through HVAC, on your shoes. So they're everywhere. The next thing molds need to grow is something to eat. They eat organic matter, just like we do, right? So they eat paper, wood products, and our buildings are full of paper. Drywall is made with paper. We have particle board. There's dust in carpeting that the mold can eat. So that's ubiquitous. And then molds also like moderate temperatures, about 60 to 80, just like we do. And then the 4th factor is moisture. Molds need water, just like we do, to live. And that's the thing we focus on. We want people to prevent water problems, when you have a leak, to respond quickly and address the moisture problem before the mold starts to grow. So anytime you have mold, you've got to fix that water problem. Otherwise, if you have mold growing in your home or workplace or other environment, it can cause respiratory symptoms, coughing, difficulty breathing, sneezing. It can trigger allergy symptoms if you have that. It can trigger asthma attacks. In rare cases, it can cause infections. People who have weak immune systems may be vulnerable to infections with molds. You may have heard of toxic mold. Well, as far as breathing in mold, we're not quite sure if toxic effects can occur. Studies are mixed. Some studies suggest it can occur, others say no. The amount of mold is not enough to cause a toxic effect. So we're not sure about toxic effects, but there's plenty of other health effects that can occur that should be sufficient for us to prioritize and address this issue. So when you find mold, or maybe you can't find it, what do? Maybe you smell an odor, that musty, mildewy odor. Maybe you're having symptoms and you know you're sensitive to mold. Or maybe there was a leak and you suspect there's mold in your building. We suggest a thorough inspection, looking for the water problem, using tools like moisture meters and infrared cameras, which I'll show you in just a second. So plumbing leaks are quite common. Sooner or later, you're going to have a drip under your sink, or maybe your washer hose to your washing machine tears and floods your house. Time is of the essence. If you can stop the leak and start drying it within a day or two, you may be able to save absorbent things like carpeting and drywall. If, on the other hand, like on the left, there's a chronic leak that's been neglected, you're probably going to have to tear out absorbent materials like drywall and cabinetry. So try to get things dried quickly. We don't usually recommend testing. We recommend other approaches to finding it. So testing for mold could be done as a last resort if you can't find it through other methods. Testing can be expensive. It can be hit or miss. Like if you test on a certain day, or depending on how your furnace is working, you may or may not detect it. And you always want to do a thorough visual inspection. So don't hire somebody that's just going to come and do some testing. You need to hire like an engineer, an architect, a building scientist, somebody who understands construction and maintenance, who can do a thorough inspection, open up areas, and hopefully find the mold that way. So the inspection would involve peeling back carpeting, peeling back baseboard, going into your crawl space, going up into your attic, removing electrical panels or plumbing panels to get inside the wall cavity. So try to find the mold through that method. And then you can also use tools like moisture meters. Here's a device that I can hold up to a wall or to some surface, and it'll tell me if it's damp. So right now my hand is a little moist, and it's going to beep when I touch my hand. There are also infrared cameras that can show areas that are wet or cold. So in the right hands and a qualified technician's hands, these tools can be very useful to find mold in our buildings. So once you've found it, you want to go ahead and clean it properly and safely. So that means using an N95 respirator to protect your nose and mouth and lungs for small problems if you decide to do the work yourself. A bigger problem, like over 10 square feet or certainly over 100 square feet, I recommend bringing in the professionals. And they'll have more thorough methods and better personal protection and containment. So when you find mold, let's say you find a little bit of mold in your house, you decide you want to deal with it yourself, look at the material. Is it drywall, carpet? Is it something absorbent? If it's moldy and it's absorbent, we recommend replacing it. On the other hand, if it's something hard like concrete, tile, solid wood, assuming it's structurally sound, it's not like crumbling or falling apart, you can clean those surfaces with soapy water. And then maybe apply bleach, but we generally don't recommend bleach unless there's sewage involved. So in conclusion, when it comes to mold, we treat all mold growth as a potential health hazard. It can affect your respiratory symptoms. It can cause allergies or asthma. So take it seriously, find the water problem, fix the leak or the humidity, remove the mold properly, safely, with personal protection. Maybe you need to isolate the area with plastic sheeting. Maybe you want to bring in professionals to do the cleanup. Generally don't recommend testing. Do an invasive inspection if necessary. Use moisture meters and infrared cameras to find the mold. The third and final topic today I have is on carbon monoxide. So this is a gas that's produced from combustion. So if you have a problem with your furnace or water heater, it can leak carbon monoxide into your home. And we have these carbon monoxide alarms. They're absolutely essential. Every home should have a working carbon monoxide alarm, at least one. So carbon monoxide is a simple gas. If any of you have a chemistry background, you're probably familiar with it. It's a molecule that has a carbon atom and an oxygen atom, CO. Oxygen that we breathe for life is actually O2. There's two oxygen atoms, O and O. So when you breathe in carbon monoxide, it replaces the oxygen in your blood. So instead of your blood carrying oxygen, it's carrying this gas your body can't use called carbon monoxide. It's produced by combustion, so whether you're burning firewood, you have a cigarette, you're burning natural gas, etc., you're always going to have a little bit or a lot of CO produced. The problem is when you're operating appliances indoors and they're not working properly or they're not installed or maintained properly. So the symptoms can be often confused with the flu. It could be, oh, I have a headache, dizziness, nausea. You might think you're coming down with influenza or something. You might feel breathless. You might feel nauseous. You might have a headache. You can pass out if you're exposed long enough, slip into a coma. And unfortunately, people do pass away. About 5 to 20 people die every year in Minnesota, and a couple of hundred people seek medical assistance in ER and urgent care sites. Now, if you're feeling better away from the home, worse at home, it might be CO. If everyone's sick at the same time, it could be carbon monoxide. If your cat and your dog is also sick, it could be carbon monoxide. So those are some cues, some signs to distinguish carbon monoxide from like an infection. Also, when you have an infection like influenza, you might have a fever, you might have body aches. You won't have a fever or body aches with carbon monoxide. So in and around our home, we need to know about our combustion-powered equipment. We shouldn't idle cars in enclosed garages. Don't use a gas grill or power tools in an enclosed space, or a generator for that matter. Use it outside. Make sure your furnace and water heater is working properly. I'd suggest an annual checkup, a tune-up of your furnace and water heater. Be careful with any portable heaters. Make sure they're working properly, installed correctly. So develop an understanding of the appliances and equipment in and around your home, but also look at other places. Like we've seen problems with boats. So we want to make sure we have alarms in larger boats that have interior accommodation areas. Portable generators can present a problem. We've seen issues in cabins, campers, ice houses. So if you're an ice fisher person, bring one of these alarms with you if you're using a space heater or some other combustion appliance or tool inside. So here's some indications of problems. You can see in the top picture, you see how the insulation has melted slightly? That indicates at some point in time, hot air was escaping from the top of the water heater and causing that insulation to melt, those tabs to melt as well. So if you have a sign, a cue like this, bring in a qualified technician to have that water heater inspected. Make sure it's not a problem. Maybe a year ago it was a problem and now it's been repaired and it's working okay. Also, signs of rust can be a problem because when there's a leak, there's also a lot of moisture that comes out of water heaters. Other signs would be orange or yellow flames, soot marks around older boilers where the air comes in, or with water heaters if you're seeing soot marks on the front of the water heater. So keep your eyes open for these signs. Usually we don't spend much time in our utility room or pay much attention to things, but keep your eyes open for these signs. And as I said, I do recommend an annual tune-up of your furnace, maybe your water heater. Make sure it's working well and doesn't have any safety issues. And very important to point out that all our homes are required to have carbon monoxide alarms. These should be UL certified, so you look for the UL and a circle around it. It should be on the back side, or if you open the battery compartment, you'll see it. These last about 5 to 10 years. So with this alarm, for example, I got this in September. So I wrote on here, replaced by September 2034. Some people forget to do that. If you pop it open, it should have a manufacture date, and then you can see how old it is. So you want to make sure you replace old ones. They do have a test button, so you can test like a smoke alarm to see if the siren works. But if it's old, replace it, regardless of whether the test button sounds the siren. So in conclusion, carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless gas. It's produced when we burn things, whether it's natural gas in your home or from a vehicle or portable generator or other equipment. It's often overlooked as something else, like, hey, I'm just coming down with my migraines or I'm getting influenza. The symptoms are very similar to other illnesses, but the key differences are everyone gets sick at the same time, your cat and dog get sick, you feel better when you leave the house, and hopefully your alarm is going off. If your alarm is working properly, it should tell you that you have a problem. So in addition to making sure you have alarms, also check out these appliances. Have a qualified technician look at your water heater and furnace about annually, I'd say. So here's our contact information, and there's more information on our website. And I'll open it to any questions. Yes?
Just a question about the mold.
Yeah.
You know, in the summertime, we get a lot of humidity. So we run a dehumidifier. In the wintertime, we run a humidifier. Now, is there a balance between what is the ideal percentage that we should look for? And do we just use our thermostat to tell that, or is there some other way we should just test our humidity?
Yeah, good question. So in our climate, in the spring, summer, and fall, I'd keep the relative humidity around 40 to 50%, maybe 60%, like in a basement. You can set your dehumidifier to turn on at 60% if it goes higher, for example. A lot of them have that feature. So spring, summer, fall, 30 to 60% most of the time is fine. When there's a big storm coming through or it's very humid, it might creep up a little bit. You can keep your eyes open for signs of condensation and humidity on cold surfaces, especially in the basement. In the winter, we kind of have the opposite problem. It gets very dry. So people like to run a humidifier to add humidity. If you're going to do that, I would say be careful. Keep the humidity in your house around 20 to 30%. A day like today, the indoor relative humidity could be 10 to 20%. So adding a little bit of humidity might be okay, but be cautious. I personally don't like to humidify my home because it doesn't really bother me, but for some people, if you have a medical need, you might want to humidify. If you must humidify your house in the winter, just look for signs of condensation and humidity. You can purchase what's called a hygrometer. It's a little gadget that you can take around your house to see what the humidity is. So again, keep it around 30% or less in the winter.
What is the average cost of radon remediation? In other words, when you have to put the stack up and stuff? Yeah,
the average cost for a radon mitigation system, I would say in most cases, about $1,500 to $3,000. So it's not insignificant, and it is certainly a barrier for many people. But for your average single-family home, I'd say about $1,500 to $3,000.
You mentioned uranium as the source. Where does the uranium come from in Minnesota?
It's just naturally part of the soil. It's found in granite and other rock materials. It's part of our geology. We have all sorts of different minerals and elements in our geology. So it starts as uranium, and uranium lasts for a long time in our soil. It does break down some of the uranium atoms, and it goes through this decay chain. And one step in that breaking down decay process is radon. And then radon ends up breaking down further into other radioisotopes. So if you're curious, you can Google uranium decay chain, and you can see the whole process. Any other questions? Yes?
In our house in South Minneapolis, they put in about 20 years ago sound insulation for the airport. They call it macking the houses or something.
Yeah.
And when they did that, they installed a fan in the upstairs that runs continuously.
Okay.
Is that necessary?
Interesting. Yeah, so that's a type of ventilation. At that time, I think the codes required it, or maybe they did it just to ensure you had air coming into the house. So when you seal up a house tight and insulated, which it sounds like they did that for noise reasons, that can stop a lot of natural infiltration of air, right? And then that can present a problem like with your furnace or water heater could cause carbon monoxide to leak into your house if you're pulling a lot of air out of the house, but you're not replacing the air. So a lot of homes in that area in the early 2000s had these little fans put in the bathroom that run continuously. That's what it sounds like you have. That helps to bring in air. It can generally be a good thing in the sense that it might reduce the risk of a carbon monoxide problem. And any indoor air pollutants you have, whether you're using a chemical, you're cooking, you're cleaning, you're painting, when you have that ventilation, it helps clear it out. But I would still suggest you test for radon. You don't know what the radon levels can be in a house. You'd want to test to know. And of course, make sure you have a carbon monoxide alarm. And there should be a makeup air. If you have an exhaust fan that's pulling air out from the house, somewhere in the house, maybe in the basement, there should be somewhere air is coming in. But you had to follow up?
Yeah, they did install makeup here in the utility room in the basement.
Okay,
So,
very good.
but my other question is, at our lake place, we bought it and installed a radon fan there, but it makes so much noise. Is it okay to turn that off at night so you can sleep?
I would recommend not doing that because you're going to have high radon half the time and then low radon half the time. So now you're being exposed to a carcinogen half the time you're there. So what I would suggest, I think someone said that, is looking at a different fan. You might be able to get a smaller fan. There's also baffling type soundproofing features that can be installed to reduce noise with existing fans. Depending where the fan is, is it on the side of the house? Is it up in the attic? They might be able to move it to a place where it's not going to be as noisy or you won't hear it as much.
Or they could go to a motel. Why not?
Other questions about this, sir?
Comment or question. So on column that started through a while ago, it was recommending a plug-in carbon monoxide detector, and comment that they should be installed in the breathing zone, not a plug-in in the wall. Because carbon monoxide is lighter than air, and it tends to come from hot appliances.
In rare cases, there can be stratification of CO in a room depending on air circulation or how hot the air is coming from the water heater. But generally speaking, what happens is it comes from your furnace or water heater in the basement. So initially when it is leaking from that furnace or water heater is hot, so it does tend to rise, but then it cools and it tends to mix fairly evenly throughout that space. So unlike smoke from a fire, where you have to have your smoke alarms up high, with CO alarms, it is acceptable to plug it in, in an outlet. So this one is strictly a battery-powered CO alarm, but there are also plug-in with a battery power. There's also CO alarms that you can tie into your electrical, so hardwire it, and it has a clip to unplug it. So by and large, it does mix pretty evenly throughout a space. If you want to have it 3 or 4 feet, that's fine. But a lot of our CO alarms are either plugged in, so maybe 1.5 feet off the floor. There's also combo CO smoke alarms. Those have to be up high because smoke alarms have to be up high. Combo smoke CO alarms are perfectly fine and good to use, but they do have to be up in the ceiling because of the smoke aspect of it.
I like the ones with the 10-year battery. They make an annoying noise when they expire. Remind you to replace them.
Yeah, a lot of these alarms will start to chirp at you when they expire. This has happened in my house a couple times. But I wouldn't assume that that's going to happen. Some of them don't have that feature. So I would encourage you to check. Some people say weekly, but that might be a little overkill. At least like you hear like during daylight savings twice a year. They tell you to check your smoke alarms, check your CO alarms, make sure they're not expired. What I did in my house is they were all about to be expired or expired, so I replaced all my smoke alarms and CO alarms at the same time. So now I'm good for like the next 9 years. And then at that time, if I'm still in my house, I'll just replace everything again.
The question I had was, with these sumps in the basement, I've seen those in the corner of fairly large houses. What's the underground range of one of those sumps when it's connected to a radon fan? It can't be infinite.
Yeah, so some of our homes have just a sump pit, and the purpose of that is if water drains to the sump pit, you can discharge water out of the house, right? So I'm not sure everyone's familiar with what a sump pit is. It is important to keep the basement dry. Make sure that's working to prevent water problems. Some homes also have piping that extends around the perimeter of the house. So you collect water to that piping, we call drain tile, and then water dumps into the sump pit, and then water is pumped out of a pipe outside to the exterior so the water doesn't come into the house. So it kind of depends on what you have in your house. Some homes have a partial drain tile around one corner of the house. Some have a full drain tile around the entire perimeter of the house. And then we can install our radon systems to that sump cover. So you get an airtight cover, you have one pipe for the water, you have one pipe for the radon, and then we can pull air from that sump basket, which reduces radon and prevents it from coming in. So I'm not sure if that answered your questions, but.
Well, I was wondering what, most houses around here are not new. And a lot of them are in places where they don't have anything more than a pit.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any sort of rule of thumb about when you have to put in a second one at the other end of the house.
For water control or radon control? For radon control, so the professionals now can do what's called a diagnostic test. So if the professional and the homeowner decide we're going to put the radon pipe on the sump hole, they can drill a hole in a other corner of the house, and they can see, am I getting suction to that point? Am I able to measure a pressure change in that corner of the house? They drill a little hole, you have a pressure gauge, and they can see if the radon system is affecting the far corner of the house. If it's not doing that, maybe there's very tight soil, maybe there's a footer under the foundation, they can propose installing the system somewhere else. So they do this diagnostic testing to determine. There's no simple guideline, a radon system is going to suck X feet. It all depends on the size of the pipe, the size of the fan, the nature of the soil. Are there footers or things under the building that can block airflow? So it really does depend on the house. That's why you got to do that diagnostic testing.
He was kind of describing.
I'm just gonna make a comment that we use the center point for the maintenance of our furnace and air conditioning and stuff. And they were just there about a month ago, and we had a carbon monoxide leak in the heater. And the heater is only 11 years old. And so they came, had the gas guy come in and check everything, every appliance and everything. So we had to actually put in a new furnace. But it's interesting that the radon, the carbon monoxide detectors that we have 2 of them, did not go off. So he said maybe the furnace has to run for a while or something that.
I'm glad you brought that up. So keep in mind, the purpose of a CO alarm is to function as an alarm, an emergency situation, telling you there's very high levels of CO in your home. Get out of your house, it's an emergency. If you stay here, you can die. The purpose of a CO alarm is not to detect low to moderate levels of CO. Now it's possible, you see it says 0, it's possible the CO alarm would detect a low level of CO, but they're not accurate or designed to detect low levels of CO. So when they come to your house, if they find a problem, they're telling you, when they do an inspection, they're not saying right now you have a CO emergency. They're saying, if you don't pay attention to this, a day from today, a week, a month, you could have a carbon monoxide emergency. So they want to kind of nip it in the bud, catch it early before it becomes a big problem. So that's why they're telling you to replace the furnace in that
He had
case.
to turn off the gas. He says, I'm not going to let you run it. He had to shut it off.
Because they're going to approach it from a place of abundance of caution. They don't want to take any chance. Because right now, maybe the CO isn't high enough for the alarm to go off. But a minute after they leave, a day after they leave, it could be. You can get a low-level CO monitor. If you want additional peace of mind, for $100 to $200, you can get a different device that detects low levels of CO. This device costs about $30. It's required in every home. The low-level CO monitors, like 100 to 200, it's not required, but I would recommend it. I think we should wrap up, or how would you like to? I can take another question, if you have any. Thank you, appreciate it.